Hello, listeners, and welcome to part 2 of this week's mini-series on The Commune with Adam Dudding. I'm your speaker, Casey, and in this second and final part of my interview with Adam, we discuss Adam's podcast journey and more about Bert Potter's Centrepoint. For early access to full-length ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/The Cult Vault. Now here is Adam Dudding from New Zealand's Stuff Podcasts. We did a cross-promotion for our shows, and my podcast entered the top 100 for true crime podcasts in Australia and New Zealand at the time that my cross promotion was running on the Commune. So it can only be that really put my podcast into the charts. So I think that's quite telling on the impact that your show was having at that time in that part of the world. So of course I was excited.
It's great.
From start to finish, how long do you think this project took overall?
Well, that figure changes on whether I'm trying to maximize it to sort of, show work done or minimize it to my managers to sort of work around the fact that it just took so long. From thinking about it as something that might be doable through to finishing it is probably about 2.5 years, but there was like a month up front and then into the bottom drawer for a month for a number of reasons, then pulling it back out again, and then at that point hooking up with Eugene Bingham, and the two of us started working on it probably half-time for about 6 months, and then the two of us sort of full-time for about another 9 months. So lots and lots and lots of labor. There's just a lot to do, a lot of people to interview, a lot of things to transcribe, a lot of tapes to transcribe, probably literally millions of words of documents to get through because there's been quite a lot of court cases, a lot of press coverage. There's 260 odd page report done by some academics looking into the after effects on the children of Centrepoint. So it's just lots and lots of stuff. There's a lot of information out there, and it's the stories. It's kind of 30 years in the telling in a way. It starts 1978 and we're talking to people in 2020 who, so it's 40 years, isn't it, who are still bent out of shape, scarred, struggling, ruined, limping, or recovering from what happened to them.
I think that's quite telling with Barry's journey through the podcast as well, not just through her existence in Centrepoint, but her talking through her own personal recollections of how the Commune came to be, what happened, how it all fell apart. There's a focus on her life since Centrepoint and where she is now, and I think that's really important to highlight, because on this show, when I speak to survivors of coercive control, it's important to look at how they've identified certain things that have been done to them, how they've worked through them, or how they are working through them, not just for the education of the listeners, but also for the advice to others who might be going through similar things. So you do have elements of that in your show, as well as really telling the story of Centrepoint. So if anybody truly wants to understand the true control and coercion that took place under Bert Potter's reign at Centrepoint, the escalation, the multiple, the polyamory or the polygamy, the drugs that start to come in, the true nature of Centrepoint and the legacy that was left behind, all of those things are explored so perfectly in the 12-part series, The Commune, which you can go and listen to on all of your podcast players. And I just wanted to ask you a few more questions on whether you have any more projects lined up. Would you consider doing something of a similar nature, or are you kind of are you done with cults? You've spent enough time in that space and you're happy to move away from that now?
Well, yeah, well, once it was over, like I said, so we finished it around about February, and then for reasonably complicated reasons it didn't get released until about June. And when it was being released and we're having to just do a whole pile of extra labor to get the damn thing out, I couldn't bring myself to listen to it again at that point, and so that fell to Eugene to make sure that there were no terrible cock-ups that we hadn't spotted. So literally this weekend is the first time I've listened to it in about 9 months. So it's, I would never ever. There were moments when there was one particular week where we'd done 3 or 4 pretty heavy interviews with some cult kids, you know, adult former children of Centrepoint, and that told some pretty horrific stories. A lot of them were in the podcast, but actually, we pulled back from a number of things. There's some worse stuff we didn't use because it was just like, oh, I don't think people need to hear this, or people are gonna hit stop. In that particular week, Eugene and I have been around. We're not particularly young. We've done stories with horrible things in them before, but we're just saying, actually, I'm not feeling very good this week. And he said, no, I'm not feeling very good. And he'd been talking to his wife, and she'd sort of noticed that he was off. And I'd noticed that I was a bit off as well. It's like, oh, that'll be because we've been marinating in other people's horrific trauma for a week, very intensively, on top of months of low-key marinating in this stuff. But no, I would never pretend that we suffered in any sense like that. But I was a bit over it by the end of it. It was like, I don't want to think about these horrible creeps and these nasty things they did, and the horrible things that humans do to God. People are awful. People are just can be so very awful. However, as it's coming to a close in New Zealand, we've got the Glory Vale thing unfolding, and there are just so many parallels. Have you done an episode on Glory Vale?
I haven't, but I know that there is a lot in the
There's
news
a lot happening
about
right now. Yeah.
Gloria Vale at the moment. So for anyone that doesn't know, it's like a secluded Christian community, fundamentalist Christian community in some isolated part of Australia.
New Zealand, yeah, but
New Z-
bottom of the South Island on the west coast. Yeah, led. I think he's dead now, but for a long time led by a literal convicted child sex offender. Yeah, no, that's true. I was just checking. Am I defaming anyone? No, that's the Glory Vale background is accurate. But I don't want to do anything about Glory Vale. But the point is, these stories aren't going away. There are, there's always a new crazy thing coming down the pipe. I haven't got any plans at the moment, but there are, there are stories out there. Eugene and I do have another podcast coming out very soon. If this is out in December, it might already be out. Look for something called True Story. True Story is our new podcast, and it should be out thoroughly by the time this goes to air. And it's not a narrative podcast. It's each episode telling an independent story. It's much smaller scale, and a little bit more not as heavy. Some of it will be heavy, but real mix. Some one week it'll be quite quirky. Another week it'll be investigative. Another week it'll just be sciencey. It's quite a general purpose sort of feature audio storytelling. But it's really rewarding doing these monster projects. There are lots of individual days or weeks or even months where you're thinking, this is horrible. I'm really sick of this. I'm never going to see the end of this process, these documents, this transcription, can't find the storyline, all those kind of things. But you do a big thing, and it does, just from a work perspective, it has longer after echoes. It lives a little bit longer, and that's really satisfying. That's really rewarding, making something a little bit bigger. So, and I've really enjoyed working with Eugene. I think that the two of us at some point might find some other big thing we want to do again. But we're quite hopeful about this new thing, True Story. So we'll see how that goes for a little while.
Well, I suppose
there might be a few years in that if we're lucky.
It's a bit lighter in content for the majority of the episodes in that series as well, I imagine, in comparison to things like The Commune and things like Gone Fishing as well, for example. Um, True Story might be a little bit easier on the old mental health, which we always need to make sure we're being uh,
Yeah.
mindful of. But do
Well, I
people
mean,
come to you and say, "Oh, I've got this story. I've got this story"?
yes. Yeah, from time to time. Uh, One is always cagey about these things, but no, just the other day, somebody got in touch and said, "Hey, you should do a story about this," and I got in touch with them and thought, actually, this might fit in. Not this because we've got this first season of True Story pretty much lined up, but this story was like, could it be a narrative podcast maybe, or maybe we could just do one really really good single episode. So the nice thing about working on a fast turnaround thing is that you have the opportunity to get in, hit it, move. Whereas once you're locked into a big project, um, you can be in the middle of the swamp, up to your knees in mud, and thinking the other side of the swamp's a long way away.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel as though you've learned a lot about the nature of cults since doing your project and sitting down and spending so much time with Barry?
Oh, unquestionably. And of course, there's a whole pile of other stuff that never makes its way into the podcast where you just, she's rattling off names of cult researchers and people who are influential on her, or, the those books from the 1970s, which were used as rationalization for dubious child sex things. And so you read all the stuff, and inevitably your brain gets full with all sorts of things. But in particular, I was really fascinated, and it was properly new to me. I learned this in real time while talking to Barry and then reading about it afterwards. Just and it'll be the stuff that you're all over. Just the commonalities, the fact that if you get that formula of a bunch of people, certain types of vulnerability, certain personality, certain power structures, the same things keep happening. And those cultic checklists, and I had no idea about those. I found that really fascinating. Um, I mean, I guess you're doing that with with a lot of journalism. You are doing that. You're always trying to find the general and the specific, and the specific and the general. You're looking for the case study which exemplifies this broader principle. Um, because both things matter. You've got to keep zooming in and zooming out. I think it's a bit in the podcast where we talk about that. We've been telling you these terrible tales of individual people and their bad days, but we just chose these people bad. We just chose the bad stories. But then, like, nah, there's this great big research project. Zoom out. 1/3 of children had experienced sexual abuse, and I'm getting the stats wrong, but so it's that moving between the fine scale and the grand scale, between the statistical and the highly specific and personal. That's really fascinating. And so the way Barry drew out those strands, those generalities, it was a revelation for me. It was fascinating.
I think I hear your personal revelation throughout the 12 episodes that I've had over these kind of 200 or so episodes with survivors and experts. On when I started the show, I had that mentality of, how could anybody ever do this, or how could anybody ever know that or suspect that there was abuse of children taking place and not do anything about it. And I
Mm,
felt like I almost heard your own brain
mm,
going through that process of listening to Barry's story and understanding how and why, and all of the undue influence that she was experiencing, and the hold that Bert had over everybody in that community. They really did
mm.
see him as their messiah. And Barry kind of really goes through that. And I was like, Adam's going through that thing I went through, where you
Uh,
get to the end and you have actually some level of compassion for Barry, where you're
oh
like,
yeah.
and she's going through that herself, and I think that's really beautiful that you hear that in the podcast, that she's having all of these revelations as well, and understanding that she has to give herself some level of compassion, and understand that yes,
Mm.
she did know or suspect that these things were taking place. And it takes a while, but she really gets there towards the end, and now she's going through these processes of reading about cults and coercion and reading Dr. Janja Lager's books. She's a good friend of the show, so I
Mm.
was really happy when her name was popping up in the podcast as well. So Barry really, as you said, is so intrinsic to the storytelling of the Commune, and yeah, I
Well,
heard you kind of wow.
well, the thing with Barry, of course, is that actually there's a mistake in the podcast. We say that she's in her 70s, but by the time it came out, she was 80. It took so long, but she, it was a long time ago. She's still living it. And she has told her story to herself and in documents she's written so on so many times. So in actual fact, that journey that she sort of apparently went through in the course of the podcast, that's somewhat reconstructed in that the first time I sat down with her, I talked to her on the phone a bit, and she has functioned as a sort of a media front for her wing of the Centrepoint, the post Centrepoint machine, if you like. So she's quite an experienced media person. But I went to meet her and sort of sat down for a pre-chat, really, to discuss whether or not, because she was unsure if she was going to go on mic or not. And she actually pretty much gave me absolutely everything from the beginning of the podcast to the end in about 2 hours, and my head was exploding. It was like, what? Everything she said was totally coherent, but it was so dense and there was so much to it. And I was scribbling down notes, and I just thought, what are you doing? What? And that guy, and the trust, it didn't follow it. It was just so complex. And then, later we did, I think, 3 long interviews with her. We must have interviewed her about 12 hours or so. And then when I looked back at my notes from that very first meeting, it had all been there all along. It was just, I couldn't comprehend it because it was just so compressed. So in a way, our job for Eugene and me, our job was sort of, just decompressing this kind of this microdot package that she gave us in that very, very, very first conversation. But the other thing you're saying about sort of my dawning realization, of course, again, there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors there, in that literally everything was co-written with Eugene and me. So we did all the interviews together, broke up pieces of research, broke up, you find those people, I find those people. And at the writing time, we structured it together. And then we sort of wrote alternate chapters. But it's just kind of, from his point of view, it's this weird ventriloquism because, it's all told in the first person, but there are great big chunks which are just, Eugene wrote them and I read them out, basically. So it's a composite human journey that you're witnessing when you hear me get it.
Wow.
It's Eugene too. And that's been one of the joys actually of working on podcasts as compared to feature writing. Journalism is always somewhat collaborative, but it's quite common that you find a story, you interview someone, you parse it, you write it, you hand it to an editor, and the editor tweaks it or improves it or changes it or makes it worse. But it's quite linear, and that's that. But working with Amy on Gone Fishing and then with Eugene on all these other projects since, it's a real joy, the collaborative, cooperative, and tensions as well. The arguments that you might have are really fruitful and enjoyable.
That's so funny that you said that Barry wasn't sure whether she was gonna go on the mic.
And then she took
That's the
then she
best thing. Oh, Barry,
all of
she's
them talked. I mean, if you'll have talked to more cult survivors than me. Everyone at Centrepoint, they could. I mean, in a good way. If any of you are listening, this isn't me complaining, but they could all talk the, what is it? The egg off an iron pot. Unbelievably hyper articulate. Partly as a consequence of the environment of the place itself. This endless quasi bullshit therapeutic environment they worked in, some of which was bullshit, some of which was sort of kosher. So much talking, so much so few constraint, really open about talking about sexual things, which in a weird way made some of what they're talking about easier because they weren't beating about the bush. They're saying this happened, it's kind of a bit graphic and awful, but it's also very clean. I don't know, some of the qualities. A lot of people got a lot of good things out of Centrepoint, but one of the qualities that a lot of people got from it, I think, is this incredible articulacy and, although some of them might be really quite screwed up, emotional openness and emotional articulacy as well, which is a bit of a gift when you're interviewing people.
So after listening to hours of Herbert Potter's rambling on, you weren't convinced by any of his rhetoric?
Not by his rhetoric. I mean, he said some things that were correct, like it's not good that the whole world has got enough nuclear weapons to blow each other up, and some aspects of Victorian sexual morality are a little bit bogus. A lot of what he said was actually just really banal,
So
actually.
you didn't find any of it sort of like there were no revelations in there for you
Mm,
personally?
not- I'm just going to pause to give a non-glib answer to see if there's anything. I'm just going to give me a moment to think. I really don't think so. I mean, to the extent that there'd be a sentence that he'd say that I'd think in those tapes, oh yeah, fair enough. It would always be something which is, either banal or a truism or a rehashing of something that I've already encountered in the lifestyle section of a Sunday newspaper, which is, you should take time to be mindful, or it's important to uh, let your children have the freedom to make mistakes, or, what. He didn't say live, laugh, love, but I don't feel I got a lot more out of him than I would have got from a live, laugh, love poster.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, isn't it? Just after hours and hours of listening to him talking in the way that he did to the people that followed him, that in this day and age, in this environment, in this mindset, there's nothing in there that stands out for you. Whereas the people at the time listening to him in the conditions that they were under, perhaps with the substances at some points in the story that they were taking as well, would have been like, oh my goodness, this is the most thought-provoking, truest and most comprehensive thing I've ever heard. And I just think that that in itself is really, really interesting.
It's a little bit sad. I think I have some. There's something that a lot of the kids said, which was like going to the commune when they turned up, and it was like, it's a big swimming pool, and it was physically quite comfortable, and um, lots to do, and a lot of freedom, and bush to play in, and all that sort of thing. And a lot of them said it was like a school camp, and then realizing that it wasn't going to end. And that's kids, but I think the same thing applied to the adults to some extent. And if you remember that euphoric, assuming you have good experiences of school camps, that euphoric feeling of turning up with a bunch of people, and it's just getting the energy off everyone, and there's no, the rules are a little bit different, and it's exciting, and it's euphoric. And I think that was one of the things that Barry said is a common cult thing. So it's not, I don't know if everybody sitting there listening to Bert burbling on thought, oh my God, this is straight from the mouth of the most awesome thinker I've ever met in the world. I think even in the magazine, they were even sometimes quite funny about it. They're sort of, referring him to him as a sort of a cut rate Jesus, or, whatever. They could see his flaws, but it still worked for them. It's like, yeah, we got to listen to his bullshit for it, but it's really comfortable on this beanbag, and I'm cuddling up to this woman who's very attractive, or this man who's very attractive, and I like that, and I like the fact that there's a nappy roster, and so I don't have to change my baby's nappies so often, and I like the fact that the food is cooked communally. So, you know, a lot of boxes could be ticked, and it's like, if I have to listen to Bert's bullshit, it wasn't Bert's bullshit that pulled them in. It was everything. It was the full wraparound experience.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think, I guess.
And again, for people to really get into all of that, then there is the 12-part series which is available. So please, Adam, can you
Oh,
tell everyone where they can find you and all of your work and all of the other work that your
oh
peers
yeah,
are working on too?
yeah. Well, so the commune itself, www dot stuff. Actually, do you say that in England. I just remember because I lived in the UK for a while, and when I got back to New Zealand, people said dub dub dub, and I thought that's weird. We say www. Do you say
Yeah,
dub
we
dub?
do say www, but I thought you were just being cool and edgy and cutting it
It's not
down, you
cool and
know?
edgy. It's just one of those incredibly boring, random, tiny vocabulary differences that you get between two countries. Um, yeah, it's not an interesting one, like the difference between a trunk and a boot and a bonnet and a
No, but
well,
we
you know
do have tea and bickies, so there are some things across the Commonwealth
exactly.
that are universal.
Exactly. We are rather more English than American, but to be honest, my kids are so TikToked up that their vocabulary is possibly more American than English. Anyway, tea and bickies, where were we? Dub dub dub. Okay, I'll make it easy for an international audience. www.stuff.co.nz/the commune, one word, and then you'll find the commune there and links to everywhere and all the usual, all the players and stuff. Or search for that inside your players. And then the other place to go is stuff.co.nz/podcasts. And that's a general landing page for all of the Stuff podcasts that have been made and are being made and will be made. So the commune is there, Gone Fishing is there, Eugene's The District is there, Eugene and My Out of My Mind is there, the mental health one. Eugene and My Tick Tick and Coronavirus NZ are there, and very shortly True Story will be there. And then there's a bunch of other excellent podcasts made by various people at Stuff. Actually, there's one that you might have encountered because we were advertising on the commune, but it might be of interest to you. It's not quite cult land, it's not quite coercive control land, but the lake. Um, it's God. If you thought the commune, the things that people did in the commune were terrible, the lake is pretty terrible. But it's kids who ended up through failures in the state. Sort of the state welfare system, these children who ended up in this adult psychiatric institution called Lake Alice. And it's also a story about colonization, actually, in the end, because a lot of these kids are Maori kids. Not all of them, but a lot of them are Pacifica and Maori kids. But it speaks to that same issue of you get a bunch of vulnerable people in a position and then give people infinite power over them. The odds are there's going to be a baddie, there's going to be a bad apple who's going to use that infinite power for pretty malign ends. So, but it's a hell of a podcast, beautifully made, and really interesting. There was an external production, but Stuff was involved. Yeah, so that's on there as well.
And I
Stuff.
imagine that they are all
Podcasts.
of a of a particular quality as well. And I know that we were put in touch by our friend, our mutual friend Sarah Ferris of Conning the
Yes, of
Con
course.
and
Yes.
Stop the Killings and all of her amazing podcasts that she has. But Conning
Yeah.
the Con is quite similar in the way that the story's constructed and the way that the elements of each thing play out. A limited series around her
Mm.
sister being conned by a serial con artist
Yeah.
and them both deciding to take the ultimate revenge against the con man, which
Yeah.
was really interesting. So it was nice for Sarah to put us in touch. So I just wanted to put a nice
Mm.
little thank you and shout out to Sarah
Yeah.
Ferris in this episode. She's my podcast mum, I call her. She takes me under her wing and looks after me. So thank you for that, Sarah, and for the introduction.
Thank you.
And
I think she's in New Zealand later this year, early next year. So I'm probably going to meet her in the flesh. So
oh, wonderful. That would be great. Oh, she'll come back to England with 10 new podcast ideas.
no doubt.
Wonderful. So there are some links I will put in the episode description so that people can find all of the things that we've talked about today. I know that I listen to the Commune on Spotify, so there is that option as well as every other podcast player that people might use. I really would like some listeners to go and head over and have a listen and then come and have a chat with me about their thoughts and feelings, because unless it's for research purposes, I don't tend to really spend time outside of work looking into to cults and cult-like environments. But I knew our interview was coming up, so I listened to the podcast, and I'm so glad I did. But typically, I wouldn't think I'm going to go and find myself a podcast about cults because, of course, you don't want to spend your whole life doing the same thing over and over. Isn't that the definition of madness? So,
But can't you call it work time? Can't you say, okay, I'm now working very hard listening to this podcast from New Zealand?
yeah, and washing the dishes at the same time, or putting the kids to bed, or whatever it is. So yeah, so I was just really glad that I did, and I'd love some listeners to go over and have a listen, check it out. Or if you've already listened, then let me know what your thoughts and feelings were. And I also thought that Bert Potter looked a little bit like David Berg, the founder of the Children of God. So I just wanted
Okay,
to throw that out
Google
there.
Play. You can use the magic of editing to make my Googling sound faster. How do you spell Berg?
Berg,
Oh, yeah, okay.
David
So,
Berg.
well, he's certainly got a lot of beard.
It's the hair and the beard, isn't it? I think that's about it. I mean, I know that that's what a lot of cult leaders have looked like, or people from that time. But yeah, I just first, because the cover art of the Commune just made me think of David Berg.
Well, what's kind of funny is that Bert had a few different looks, and in actual fact, this is n- the main image that's been used of him. It's an incredible image because he's looking right down the barrel, and he's got this wild hair. He and he's got these big mutton chops. I think this must have been really quite an early image, maybe like 1979, 1980 kind of thing, because um, later in the 80s, when I became aware of him, uh, he had slightly less crazy hair. But anyway, that's not very interesting. You might want to cut that as well. That was totally boring.
I'm just looking here and I see exactly what you mean.
But yeah, he quite often just looks a little bit more. Well, he still looks rather like a 50-year-old businessman who has just caught a little bit of the informality of the 80s and has let his hair grow a little bit. But he doesn't look like a wild crazy. Yeah, that's classic. That photo. Yeah, that's classic.
This is a wild picture. For anybody that's listening, I've just Googled Bert Potter, and to actually see the residents or members of the commune all together in one picture, that's actually quite haunting. There are so many people here in this picture, so many
Yeah.
children, tiny,
Yeah.
tiny children. Wow.
Though we, for a number of reasons, when we didn't use a lot of images, and all the images we basically sort of blurred and anonymized a lot of things. So I mean, there's more stuff on the internet. Actually, I don't want to say that. I'll just stop there. Um,
Wow. Yeah, these are all on the Stuff website as well, these pictures. I've just realized I'm just scrolling through Google and it's all.
oh yeah, those ones associated with our pieces.
Wow. Amazing. Brilliant. So thank you so much, Adam, for your time today. It's been wonderful to speak to you in real time instead of just listening to your narration through my headphones. And I know that it's late over where you are in New Zealand. It's the morning for me, and I never interview in the morning. So this is certainly a change of pace. And I just
Well, I
appreciate
appreciate.
you, your time, and explaining to the listeners and anybody who might stumble across this episode the time and depth and energy and thought process and everything that goes into actually putting together 12 episodes. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's clearly a lot. So I appreciate you giving us a look and some insight into the actual work that goes into a project like this as well.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for being interested, and yeah, nice to have a quick chat to Liverpool in the middle of the night.
I found the podcast really a great addition to cult education, cult awareness, and yeah, just an insight into some people that are alive right now that have some incredible stories, Barry and Robert being two of them. So thank you so much for your time, Adam, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
I will. I shall.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
That is the end of this mini-series on the Commune. To find Adam's work, follow the link in the episode description or search for the Commune across your podcast player. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. Going into 2023, I wish you all the best of luck and a happy, healthy new year. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.